very much for coming back after our short break. As you can tell, we're running a little bit over time, but only a little bit. In this session, I want to welcome Chiu, who's the head of ESG and carbon markets at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, whose fantastic venue we are lucky enough to be in, and of course, who's trying to drive the growth of carbon markets and ESG in Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area and the region. Ken, over to you to introduce your panelists. Please come up.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I promise I'm not going to talk about carbon. And you are not going to have a carbon-neutral alcohol after this. So pleasant to have all of you this afternoon. And today's topic is about tools for scaling up the transition across the region. And we are very pleasant and honored to have four very, very distinguished guests this afternoon. May I introduce them one by one. The first one, I have Victoria Jin, the head of International Business Development, Win Information Limited. Please have you on stage. Then I have Diana, Executive Director, Policy, Public Policy and Sustainable Finance from ASIFMA. Thank you. Shen Shuangbo 女士, President, CCX Green Finance International. And last but not least, Jacqueline, the President of MioTech. Thank you. Right, please take a seat. Okay, today we have guests from a very diversified background, from, for example, data provider, rating, reporting, and so on. So it's very important. We're trying to get the very insightful view from all of them to cover this topic. So tools for transition financing. So how to make transition work. Obviously, transition is one of the key elements for us to combat against the climate change. Obviously, I promised Sean not to talk about carbon, but carbon, technically speaking, it should be one small element of which is fall within transition, because it provides necessary financial resources, incentive for different market practitioner or certain project proponent to continue the work. But on a broader term, we're not just talking about combating climate change. It's about transition. So there are a wider scope of things that should be covered. So today, I think in this section, we're going to have a very insightful views from all the speakers on stage to cover the following items. I think the first one, really, to understand from their perspective, what do we mean by transition? Before we talk about the tools, right? Tool is just a means of achieving things. But what is transition? There are a lot of different argument or controversy, especially in this space. So how do they understand about this subject? The second one is about the trend, because all of us here are from very different backgrounds, and all of the speakers from the stage are also from very different backgrounds. So what's the trend they observe from the business, the clients, the market, and all the aspects, regulations, how all this evolved recently. So that's the second one about the trend. And also we want to have a good insight between international and China onshore, because it's very important, like what we have earlier session from Dr. Ma, there is a taxonomy dedicated for transition. So all of these are relevant to all of us here. So how are all these interact between onshore and offshore? And also, we're going to cover a couple of topics in terms of very dedicated topics about transition finance, including regulatory landscape, data information, disclosure, reporting, and also find more important, how do we incentivize investor to do it? Because after we talk all about taxonomy and things, if there is no investor who want to pay the bill, it won't happen. So it's important to have the whole value chain cover from the good understanding, the tools, and the tools not for just creating the asset, but also to help investors to make investment decisions. So those are the three key areas that we're going to cover today. And finally, of course, we would love to have the view from all the speakers to talk about forward-looking, how this market will evolve, anything they observe or anything we anticipate, and we can discuss next year here. So to take the time, cut it short. So I would like to have the stage and try to go around the speakers on all these topics one by one. And just to heads up, so some topics will be conducted in Chinese. So if you need the SI, so please get it ready. Okay. So let's start. As promised, the first one is about the understanding and definition of transition. So the first question I would love to throw to Dinah. So how do you understand transition?
Thank you, Ken, for throwing this massive question on me, on my shoulders. I will try to carry.
No, per Sean's instruction.
Sean will carry the weight, I'm sure. Transition. Well, that's the good question, isn't it? How, and I think it was mentioned in one of the previous panels, how we actually define transition.
Yeah.
That's one of the questions that we have to be quick in answering, because again, as Sean said at the beginning, we have to plan now if we want to achieve something by the time we targeted ourselves. Yeah. But in order for you to plan, you have to be clear of how you're planning and what for you are planning. Yeah. So right now, I was very encouraged to hear from Dr. Ma Jun that China is thinking of transition taxonomy. We do know, for example, Singapore is going to have taxonomy which will include transition activities. Yeah. We are waiting for the European Union to kind of proceed with their thinking and perhaps include transition into their taxonomy. UK has also signaled that maybe transition is going to be on the cards for their taxonomy. Yeah. So for me, actually representing not only banks but people from all sorts of different segments from the financial sector infrastructure, having clear definitions is super important.
Absolutely.
And I know as a fact that all of them have already committed to achieve net zero mostly by 2050. Yep. I know that all of them by and large have transition plans and strategies how to achieve this. However, I also know that they're all kind of concerned whether their vision and their understanding of transition would be supported by the common view, because so far nobody is endorsing these taxonomies. And let's face it, with the exception of Europe, taxonomies are not part of the fabric of the regulatory landscape. Right. So this is something which I think, what is transition is an open question right now.
Sure, absolutely. Maybe we can talk about like how a regulator can play a role in terms of such definition. So it's very important. I hear, Diana spot on the point that if we only can achieve a reasonable end game if we know what we are doing, right? So definition is key. Now, I would also love to have a view from Ms. Shen. So, 沈总，那个对于这个转型，你的这个看法是怎么样的？
提问题，我在线下说，如果你用英文来提问题，我就拒绝回答。
This is also transition.
大家好，我是来自中国大陆中诚信瑞金的沈双波，非常高兴受 CBI Shen 还有各位同事的邀请，参加今天这样一个国际性的会议哈。那因为我们中诚信在国内做了很多年的以可持续发展相关的这样的工作，是一个独立的第三方机构。那么今天这个议题呢，是以转型作为一个主要议题。那么对于转型来说，我个人是这样的一个观点，就是说转型是在这2年呢，为了我们全球应对这个气候变化这样一个大的背景下，为支持我们实现说未来净零排放也好，或者说温度的减低1.5度也好，这样的一个目标，我们要做的这样的一个努力，就是让低碳的向净零排放去发展，高碳的向低碳去发展。我认为转型是这样的一个范畴。那么在这样一个范畴下呢，就目前来看，在中国大陆在做转型的这个方向上，尤其是金融去支持转型发展这个方向上呢，其实它是相对狭义的。相对狭义的是指什么？ 刚才讲到说，我认为转型它应该是应对气候变化，那么它包括像我们说环境的保护啊，然后这个生物多样性啊等等。那么现在狭义的概念，它可能集中到温室气体排放，就是二氧化碳的排放上。那么在这个领域上呢，现在在中国大陆呢，它是有这样的一个资本市场的定义的。资本市场它发了一种债券，叫转型债券。另外就是这是在资本市场的一种债券。那么在这个金融机构给予融资支持贷款的时候，也有这样的一个产品。那么它主要定义的范畴呢，其实有几个可能是有些歧义的，比如说我们煤炭清洁高效利用啊、天然气啊这些。但是有一个领域是大家都认同的，就是我们说8大领域的8大行业的，或者就叫高耗能行业的。能量等换置换，能量等量的置换，能耗等量置换这样的一个领域，包括今天前面也有嘉宾，他提到这个像钢铁，我们上一个环节有一个嘉宾专门提到了钢铁的行业。现在在中国大陆的转型债券这个领域，第一个领域是做的最大的是在电力这个行业，那么占到大概30%这个债券转型债券的范畴内。那么另外就钢铁是在第2位，大概在9.8%左右这样的一个范畴，就是它的规模。那么比如说我给大家举个例子，说我们对转型的理解，我就是认为它一定是向着我们全球的应对气候变化这样一个目标。那么这个目标呢，对于不同的企业来说可能是不一样的，但是它只要是向转型低碳的方向去发展，我认为它就属于转型。然后我们上一个环节广探所的嘉宾也提到，像这个比如说我们欧盟这个碳关税这个问题。那么在中国来说，就是我们只有规模大的才能进入到全国碳市场或者区域的碳市场，但是有很多的小企业它是进不到这个里边来的。那么在这个环节上呢，我们说对于转型的定义就尤为重要。所以在国内的话，在中国大陆的话，其实很多地方政府或者行业做了一些转型的自己的标准。为什么是这样去做？只有这样去做的话，我们才能够让所有的企业能够参与进来，让金融机构去支持它的发展。对，这是我的理解，谢谢。
谢谢沈总。So just now, Ms. Shen gave a very good overview in terms of what transition happened in China, and obviously that involved both micro and macro definition in terms of transition. So bundling with what Diana mentioned, obviously different jurisdictions are doing a different taxonomy, their own scheme, and hopefully there is a common ground. And even in China onshore, obviously there are different understanding and potentially different rules or try to guide the industry to achieve especially the differentiation between the micro and also the macro definition. So obviously it is very important to align all this, regardless from jurisdictional perspective or even within the same jurisdiction. Different people are trying to view transition in a different way. I mean, obviously that's something that we can work together on it. Otherwise, that would be very difficult for us to achieve the common goal, right? So that's, I try to, have a holistic view between international space and also China in terms of the definition. Now, the swing to a little bit more specific and just leaving from the definition, we want to talk about the trend. So we open up to questions to all the speakers on stage. Maybe I start from Victoria. So from your perspective, from a day-to-day business, or because you're providing holistic financial data for different users, what do you observe in terms of trend, if there's anything related to this topic? Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your questions, Ken. And as a data provider, especially financial data provider, as well as the infrastructure service provider in Asia, actually we position ourselves as a role in the financial ecosystem as a connector to provide the analytical tools to facilitate the information as well as the transaction flows. So the information and data that we provide actually demonstrate some of the mega trends and the prospects in the transition finance. The first one is that there should be a credible and also approaches and tools to identify and label the transition activities. This could be in the form of transition taxonomy or directory, and there have also been some of the voices or the calls in the market that we can introduce some of the third-party evaluation mechanism which may provide a more scientific and consistent opinion on the transitional performance. So this is why WIND is also collaborating with some of the international institutions such as CBI, and we conduct joint research on subcategories and some certification criteria for the ESG or green transition bonds. We aim to provide more comprehensive and updated data that can make all the participations in the financial ecosystems that can be well-informed and prepared. And the second one is that we see some opportunities in the foreseeable future is that the requirements and the guideline for the information disclosure especially for the transition activities has become increasingly clear and standardized. So for this part, we think that actually it is a very promising and worthwhile direction for us as a data provider to invest in, because the investors, they need more reliable and transparent data to identify and also distinguish the authenticity of these transitional activities. And for this part, I would like to share, some of interesting statistics that from WIND is that as of June this year, we found that there are around 30% of China Asia companies that have disclosed their ESG-related reports for the year 2022. And although some of their reports are, qualitative in nature, so lacking kind of quantitative or standardized data, but we see that over 400 companies, they also disclosed their carbon emission data in these kind of reports. And we also see that so even though the total volume of this kind of information disclosure is still maybe relatively low, but we are optimistic is that there is a significant increase, compared to the previous year, because we can see from the data that the companies disclosing their greenhouse gas data emission for the year 2022 be in 1.7 times that of the previous year. Yes. And the third one is that we see that a toolbox of financial instruments, should be improved to support the transition activities. I think everyone may know that the main types of this kind of financial instruments in China onshore markets are mostly sustainability or transition-linked products, and the other one is the equity-related products. The most common one is the sustainability-linked bonds. So from our data, we see that there is a total of 92 these kind of bonds have been issued as of June this year since their introduction in 2021. So we see that nearly 90% of the issuers are SOEs, and but it is interesting that actually the industries with high carbon emissions, they will have a stronger willingness to issue this kind of bond. So we see a very increasing trend towards the improvements over the coming years, that even though some regulators have not yet made the requirements on the measurement, some of the bonds products have already voluntarily and clearly disclosed their like expected carbon reduction benefits into this kind of ESG reports. So this is a very optimistic findings that we have. So I think all of all, we can see that there is an increasing awareness and also the increasing demand in the like information disclosure as well as the toolbox of these financial instruments in the transition finance. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. I think that there are 3 key points that Victoria mentioned. One is about how do we enhance the credibility by using appropriate tool, including label. Second one is the trend, the disclosure trend. Higher standardization will hopefully help people to make judgment. And third one, the trend is there are more disclosure and more people willing to disclose, be it the bond, SLB bond, or equities link. So all these are the trends, if I hear correctly, from Victoria, the points that she made. But thanks her that she tried to lead towards the tools, because it's really about what sort of right instrument that we can make use of to help on the investment instrument. And obviously, back to the definition, because in order to prove or try to adhere to the definition that we want to stick to, or taxonomy, data is the tool to prove it. With good quality, data quality, it cannot be done with good data quality. So from Victoria, I also have a question for Jack. Now it's more dedicated. You also have data, reporting, disclosure. What have you observed?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Ken. Now, I didn't get a chance to answer the question on transition, so I'll just I actually take a very macro view to transition, because what is occurring now, the whole trend towards ESG and decarbonization is nothing short of revolutionary. And it's not just the capital market, it's the entire economy, okay? So we are now being asked to measure, track, and evaluate factors that previously were not emphasized in financial decisions. So previously, capital markets like Hong Kong Stock Exchange, where we're sitting at, the decisions on which stocks or which bonds are purchased is really driven a lot by financial considerations, of financial data. Now we're being asked to incorporate a whole host of additional layers of data. And obviously, my co-panelists have talked about taxonomy and regulation, which is very important. And as that discussion continues, we at MioTech decided that the methodology has to have an Asian perspective, because currently most of the globally widely accepted standards are all driven outside of the region. So we have created our own methodology, which aims to measure the points that are of consideration in climate bonds, in ESG reports. And so in terms of the tools, we have deployed AI before it became so fashionable towards the question of how do you gather vast amounts of data, both from the public sphere as well as tools for private engagement. So unlisted companies, companies that are not currently in the public market, they also need to be part of this transition finance. So how can they get onto this trend? They have to then start to disclose their own relevant data. And so who provides the tools to private companies, SMEs even, to be able to join this trend? So we at MioTech have pioneered the methodology now that managers managing more than $10 trillion in assets, when they invest in markets that MioTech covers, they're relying on our data and our methodology. So we believe that this trend is only accelerating, and furthermore, as this whole ecosystem improves, and there's more transparency and there's more standardization, what you're seeing is, obviously the regulatory pull is important. We need to have standards and we need to have common taxonomy. But equally important, if not even more important, are the market forces. So previously when we talked to Asian corporates, they said, the view on ESG and the whole decarbonization is like, it's a luxury. we're here, Asia, we've only just recently become wealthy. It's a luxury we can afford. Let the Europeans do good. We're here to make money. Well, guess what? It is about money. Because if you do these disclosures well, your cost of equity funding goes down because there's more fund managers that want to buy your stock. Your stock price trades at a higher level, all things being equal. You get better debt terms from banks and from the capital markets. So once you integrate the market forces, and that's driving it, and we're definitely seeing that, then the whole trend will accelerate because it's not only it's really doing what's good for your own firm, in addition to having positive externalities. So I think that combination is a very powerful force, and that's really going to accelerate this trend towards transition.
Thank you, Jack. Well, the points are quite very distinct in terms of deep dive into the Asia perspective. As you mentioned, that a lot of rules and definition or tools are driven from international. But what if that we have tools available in Asia perspective that we're very helpful to do the transition. And also in terms of data sourcing, if I heard about it correctly, adapting technology could increase the accuracy, efficiency, so that bundling both of that to create market forces and becoming one of the norm for financing transition, so that people can make good investment decisions. So all this coupling a very step into the tools, a lot of good points from the speakers. I also heard one or two points mentioned by Jack about regulation, but I would pass on to Diana later after I have a question also for Ms. Shen. Okay, 沈总，那刚才两位讲者已经提到好几个点，关于这个数据哈，数据呢是关于这个无论是一个金融数据的提供方啊，就是他们有不同的这个数据的提供源，然后呢，现在看到呢，从 label 怎么去提高这个数据的质量，然后呢，怎么样去就也看到呢，很多这个发行人也是越来越愿意去把这个披露作为他一个标准哈。那刚才 Jack 总也提到了，就是说希望呢在咱们这边有一个亚洲这个 perspective 的一些工具哈，然后呢也用一些这个技术能够呢把这个数据的这个来源也可以抓到手上。那但是从第三方的机构啊，从您的角度，你觉得你看到的 trend 是什么？你的趋势是什么？然后这块呢跟刚才Victoria 还有那个 Jack 总提到的，是不是一致呢？这个
从这个刚才说到在转型这个领域上，前面我们提到对这个转型的一个定义和概念，因为在前边的第一个圆桌的嘉宾都提到了这个范围，就是定义我刚才也提到了我的观点哈。那么现在我觉得对投资人是一个广义的投资人吧，包括就是我们主体再去融资的，为主体提供资金的所有的这个投资人，我们都放到这个范畴上，包括银行提供贷款是吧？那么在这个范围内的话，投资人其实对转型的领域的支持是比较难的。难在的原因就是刚才说到的第一个问题是它的定义为什么没有一个全球或者说甚至一个区域？刚才提到说第一个环节上，咱们的那个马首席也提到，央行其实就大陆的央行已经牵头在做一些领域的，就它不是所有的。我说的一些领域就是一些行业的转型的标准，在很多区域也是在做这个。那么对于投资人来说呢，这一块为什么会有这种难度？就是因为刚才说它没有一个统一的标准。那么对于第三方机构来说呢，作为我们认为怎么样去为投资人提供这样的服务？那么第一个就是说，对于转型来说，首先我觉得应该要满足所有投资人对这个转型自身发展的一个要求的一个标准。就是我们每一个机构，可能我们负责任投资原则，或者说你是这样一机构，可能第一个你要符合你行业的监管的要求，像大陆有这样的是吧？行业监管，比如说我们银行、保险、基金都有。那么第二个就要符合自身的投资发展的这个要求。 那么作为我们第三方机构来说呢，我们来判定这个转型的这样的一个产品的时候呢，就是说它是不是我们认为是转型的概念，就是我前边说到的这样2个方向一个是净零低碳，就绿色的我们叫绿色的领域向净零，然后这个高碳的棕色的向低碳转型。那么在这个过程中，第三方机构去做什么工作呢？它主要做的是按照这些行业，以你现有的标准，行业的最优值或者最佳值作为一个标准，那么由你现在的这个方向向那个目标去努力，这样的一个过程。但这个过程中呢，就需要刚才提到的这些数据。那么这个里边说，在转型的标签我们在做认证的时候，最重要的是它可以量化。可以量化，就是说我不能说它叫转型就是转型。那么这个量化是指什么呢？比如说刚才提到的8大行业的这个量化的指标，每一个行业都会有，比如在中国大陆，它就有这个行业每年都会出这个行业的优秀值优秀值它主要是2个方向，一个是单位，第2个是综合能耗。就这2个方向。那么在这个2个方向上，作为一个企业去定这样目标的时候呢，第一个你要符合企业自身的一个发展的方向和你发展的阶段。你是在整个供应链中的最核心的企业，还是在供应链中的一个供应商的位置？那么你要根据这个情况，然后去定自己的指标。作为三方机构来说呢，第一个我要确保这个数据的一个准确性，第2个我要确保它这个数据是可以计算出那个量化的结果的，就是我们要达成的未来的这样的一个目标。那这样一个目标呢，我们去为投资人做好一个守门员的这样一个身份，去帮助他去识别这样的风险，然后去找到符合自己的投资这个标的的这样的目标。这是我们现在在做的一些在转型这个方向上。那然后我还想多在今天这个场合多介绍一下中国大陆现在的在这个可持续发展方面的一些工作前面那个马首席其实也提到了咱们国内现在做的，那我主要跟大家介绍一下这个资本市场。在国内的其实还有一个领域的产品叫可持续发展挂钩债券，或者可持续发展挂钩贷款。这个呢，因为在咱们香港现在做的也非常非常的多，而且香港政府在这个方面是给予很好的一个资金的支持的。那么在这个领域上，其实可持续发展挂钩相关的产品里边有很多是属于转型范畴的。我认为它是，其实它就是转型范畴的。对，只是它的目标呢，可能叫一个可持续发展，用联合国的可持续发展17个目标去定义，但其中有些是完全是符合这个方向的。那么在中国大陆去年推出了一个转型债券，这个债券呢，去年就是说我们大家都在说像全球应对气候变化这个方向去努力，但是我们可以看到，就在中国大陆这样一个市场上，从资本市场已经有明确定义的一个产品转型的债券，但是它的发行规模仅有不足300亿。它占整个中国债券发行规模的不足0.5%，所以从这个点来看，其实真的是任重而道远。从我们的第三方机构，从我们的发行人主体企业，从金融机构，其实都是我们的责任担当。谢谢。
谢谢沈总。To conclude what Ms. Shen mentioned, I think the point is, of course, collaborating what the speakers mentioned. There are a lot of things that we need to achieve. What Ms. Shen mentioned is about the difficulty or challenge in terms of aligning different standards to quantify the necessary criteria, and also to ensure the data accuracy and the quality in order to make sure that they're providing, from a third-party service provider perspective, providing necessary service, a good decision for their clients. And obviously, one key point Ms. Shen mentioned is about 2 data points, right? One is about 30 billion. That's 0.5% sustainability-linked bond in onshore China. And obviously, from her perspective, it can play a key role and key tools to support the transition. So that's highlight. I mean, we have both the perspective from international and onshore, loud and clear. And obviously, a lot of things to be done. So I'm going to go around the table for more specific questions, how we can achieve all this from different perspectives. And I'm trying to combine the question for Diana, be it the trend, but more importantly, from a regulatory perspective, obviously, regulation should play a role, key things. How do you expect, and what like ASIFMA has been doing, how all these like different matrix, I would say, from Asian perspective, trends, standard, data quality, what sort of things that regulation should play a role? What sort of landscape are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And at ASIFMA, we represent 170 financial institutions. Some of them are sitting around me. A lot of them are among the public. And these are people from various kind of segments of the financial sector system. So they have different perspectives and they have different objectives, they have different interests, and they all have to function together and deliver one goal which is common. And this takes quite a lot of skill actually, and although we're often critical to regulators and sometimes we would like them to rush, sometimes we would like them to pause, and it's difficult to please us, frankly. And it's a difficult task because you have to accommodate everybody. A lot of my colleagues are talking about data gathering, and how actually you assess the facts. This is super important, and for all of our members, being them banks, asset managers, data providers, service providers, we all deal with data. Unless you have the facts correctly, it's very difficult to make the right decision. Right. It's like the chicken and the egg question, you know? You want to have the definitions and you want to have things clear, but how you actually measure whether they're clear if you do not have the right data? I think in terms of data, we have progressed quite a lot, and we heard from the co-panelists, a lot has happened in the past couple of years, and we all acknowledge this. So in terms of regulation, to get back to your question, I think similar things are happening in public space and within the regulators. Actually, I started with the ASIFMA a year ago, and I can see just for this 1 year, the number of public consultations that we respond to, the number of kind of policy initiatives that come from different regulators, it's kind of like a snowball. It's getting bigger and bigger, and it's rolling faster and faster. And you do know this well because you are some of the Hong Kong exchange trying to pioneer certain things.
I can't comment on that.
Yeah, you are keeping us busy as well. But we do appreciate this, and we want to keep the balance. So it's not easy actually to put the framework correctly, and we all have to contribute to this somehow. So that's perhaps what I can say about regulation. It's super important because unless we do have the clarity, it's difficult for us to move collectively. As we discussed in our kind of prior discussion, financial sector is a very heavy machine. It's one of these heavily regulated machines, and it takes a while to actually take a turn. I think we did take a turn, but now in order to speed up, we need a little bit of encouragement. And also, why we're talking about regulation when it comes in the context of financial sector? Because we're a heavily regulated sector. And we do expect not to kind of have limitations by regulations, but have a sense of direction from the regulators and regulations. And this is kind of part of our legacy, part of our DNA. As I said, some of the banks have hundreds and thousands of kind of employees, products and everything. Unless you have clarity of what you should be doing, it's difficult to risk so much. So that's, I think, the important part that regulators should play. And I think it was mentioned in one of the previous panels, incentives. Regulation can be incentive. It shouldn't be impediment. It should incentivize the sector. Incentivize by encouraging, by giving the confidence that we're doing the right thing, but also incentives in terms of blended finance, in terms of just transition, in terms of various things that we can see could be very, very helpful, because a lot of these investments that we're talking about, they're still quite difficult, and they're still not kind of mature enough. Technologies are in development, and we hope to have many more technologies in the pipeline in order to achieve the net zero, and they all require certain support. So that's where I think the role of not only regulation, but the role of governments more broadly is.
Absolutely. So I love the point. I mean, incentive, right? Regulation is not just about punishment, but incentive. And also, it's very important, I think, it makes us heavily regulated industry. Financial industry is heavily regulated. And obviously, how we can balance the different interests of value of different stakeholders, because you need to take care of all the views to make sure that the system and framework is robust, while you keep agile, because the things is very happening. It changes very fast. How do we cater all the topics that we discuss? You also talk about tech, because everyone is waiting, queuing up at the door and trying to get financing, hopefully under a good framework and standard. How we achieve all this? So one word, work together to achieve that. So from regulatory perspective. So moving on from regulation, so the top tier one is balance, work together. Going back to something always associated with regulations is about, I mean, what Diana also mentioned, data to prove it. The data, the disclosure, reporting, because, I mean, regulators love reporting. We've done a lot of reporting. But there are different things, right? Because we talk about the quality, and disclosure is about transparency. Reporting is about audit trail, right? And different things we are talking about. All these are tools. So how are all these interacting? So I would love to have a view from Victoria first. From data provider perspective, are we going to involve in all this, and how all this should evolve?
Yes, and firstly, I would like to, I can't agree more with Jack that, because data provider like MioTech and also Wing should stand for the perspectives that from Asia and also Greater China. So actually, there is an interesting trend emerging where we see that is the transition finance or transition activity requirements that will impact the upstream and downstream supply chain. So for example, the ESG reporting guide of Hong Kong Exchange has made it mandatory for companies to disclose their supply chain management practices in the key performance indicators in their social pillar, you know. So we found that there is a growing demand from our client base for access to track like the operations of their target companies or projects. They also want to make like cross-sector comparison and also conduct some thorough research to determine whether those transition activities are really impacting a wide range of dimensions across the whole product chain. So the current capability of Wing has already enabled them to do this kind of in-depth analysis both horizontally and vertically with our product chain database, which covering like over 5,000 industries and 20,000 companies in Asia market, as well as over 160,000 upstream and downstream relations. And so next, we are still looking into incorporating more like sustainability and risk disclosure and some transition activities related indicators into our database to like improve the overall framework. And the second one is like, as Ms. Shen mentioned, that we are also trying to figure out how to provide more reliable and comprehensive quantitative data support for the data users that to make this kind of information disclosure. And our current ESG and carbon database has already covering data from over 9,000 companies and for the past 5 years historical data. And we also provide like 180 indicators in the environmental pillar, and 70% of them be in quantitative data.
Right.
So this includes some key performance indicators such as the carbon emissions or carbon intensity in scope 1, scope 2, and also scope 3.
Okay.
And what's next, what's more is that we can also incorporate this kind of ESG data with our current like product chain database, and as well as the business operations and their financial performance to get more insights from the like R&D investment and application in this kind of green transition. So this allows the market participants to have a better way to determine whether they are making sufficient efforts and like to making steps towards a more sustainable future. And the third one, we think that is, so like Ms. Shen and I also mentioned about the financial instruments, which is the transition and sustainability linked bond. And I think as a part of financial data provider, as Wing presents, we also infrastructure service provider that providing a kind of asset management solutions and also trading platforms. So we are still reinforcing these kind of ways to connect more resources and also counterparties throughout the financial market to bring more liquidity to this kind of product trading, as well as to incorporate this kind of transition-related products into the whole investment portfolio.
Right.
Yes. So I think this is all we can do to facilitate and also can contribute our offerings to support the transition activities. And also we do have a lot of Wing product metrics to launch and also like to promote this kind of information disclosures, not only the product itself, but also penetrate to the underlying.
Right.
Yes.
So there are two folds. I think the first fold is about supply chain, because I think that one is key. That's also here to, from our day-to-day work, of course, carbon. I promise not, again, not talk about carbon, but supply chain formulate one of the key force of the transition. Whenever there is upstream force to push the supply chain to change, and obviously there are a lot of supply chain locating in onshore China, in some of the Southeast Asia jurisdiction, they also need to make a change. And obviously, how do we make good use of the data available, especially, I mean, scope 3 is still a pain point to be cracked.
Yes.
And also some of the financing to go back to the underlying, how would that make it happen? And obviously, the underlying part is also a key tools to support the transition. Now, similar question to Jack. I know MioTech have been dedicated to the reporting on disclosure and things and carbon. So how do you see what you guys are doing in terms of facilitating the transition and address a lot of points that we mentioned previously in the panel?
Yes, so I completely agree with my co-panelists. Having complete and accurate data is key to powering this transition. It is the key to defending yourself against charges of greenwashing. Yeah. Because if you've got the underlying data to prove, quantitatively, to prove what you say you are doing, to drive the capital to the right places where we want to drive it, to fund some of these transition projects through bonds, through equity financing. So it's absolutely clear that our mission is to bring technology to solve this problem of data gathering and data management so that you have the best quality data possible and you've got the analytics that then you can gain insights from. So in that regard, we have the largest dedicated ESG corporate database in Asia, 4 million companies. So it's the most complete data set. So once you solve the problem of gathering the data, then what? What does that mean? How do you make sense of it? How do you compare it to your peers? And this is why even private investors, private equity firms come to us for our tools now, because we're seeing now the divide between public and private. Previously, private companies say we're under no obligation to disclose. We're private. We're not subject to HKEX, SFC. what you're finding now, and as to the point about supply chain, they're being driven by their stakeholders. So they may not have public shareholders, but they do have shareholders, and they may be sovereign funds, pension funds. Now the LPs are forcing the GPs to disclose. They are providing a product or a service to someone, and if that ultimately ends up in one of these major multinational supply chains like Apple, they're subject to incredible scrutiny now. So they need to gather the proper data and organize it properly so they can make this reporting. So the divide between public and private we see that diminishing. So disclosure is going up across the board, including in the private realm, which is very positive. Second trend we see, and that we are part of facilitating this, driving this, is that cross-border. So I'll give you an example. We have some clients who are Hong Kong Exchange listed Chinese companies, world-class in their industries. So they operate in 100 countries, they got subsidiaries, they got brands all around the world. So if you look at, from my client's perspective, so they have to subject themselves, they're subject to Hong Kong Exchange rules and SFC rules, that's a given, that's local regulation. But because they have global operations and have global supply chains, how do you gather the relevant data from 100 affiliates around the world, thousands of suppliers from all corners of the world, to satisfy both Hong Kong regulations and European and American regulations, because their clients come from those places, and they're often asked to disclose as per TCFD, PRI, there's a whole alphabet soup. So our technology helps this company to automate and digitize what was previously a manual process, a big, massive Excel spreadsheet that they try to manually track down all these numbers. Prone to error, lots of pain. So we're now accelerating that by digitizing it and computerizing it. So, and we have a similar solution that we work with banks to allow SMEs to be able to organize their disclosure so that they can do business with multinationals, they can sell across borders. So we see, obviously, the local regulations are important, and we contribute to that discussion to standardize it, to have a common taxonomy. But again, I go back to the market forces, because if they're doing global business, then they have to care about these standards that exist in other places. And so you can use technology. So a Chinese company manufacturing a widget that is sold ultimately, it's incorporated in an iPhone, they can also get in this game because they can deploy technology.
Right. But one point before I summarize, I want to declare that Hong Kong East doesn't make things complicated, right? So we
I didn't say that.
Right. But key points, I mean, how to make sense of data, right? Cross-border. I mean, so all these point towards the investor part, right? Make the right decision. Now, because we, at the beginning, also running short of time, we mentioned that at the end of the day, investors have to pay the bill. I mean, they got the buy-in from the investor. Otherwise, it won't happen. So I combine the last question with this. So how do we, for all the four speakers, first one is, how do we make sure that investor will get the buy-in, we get the buy-in from them? Second one is, can you provide some forward-looking points in terms of transition tools, as well as any advices for the audience? Maybe to start with, Victoria.
Okay, thank you so much for your questions. And
She's done.
And I think I have already shared a lot of our observations on the transition finance,
right,
and the current, especially the onshore markets, how transition finance gaining the awareness, and also we have seen that there is an increasing trend that the market participants are trying to do what they're trying their best, yes, to contribute to this kind of aspects. And forward-looking, I think, as a data provider and on the financial service provider, the most important thing is that we have to find what we see on the horizon is that the needs of these market participants. And so what we want to make progress or make a foothold is that we have to address or assist in solving their pain points. So we can see that the market participants include the investors and financial institutions, the credit rating, and the regulatory agencies. So the most important thing for us as a data provider is to leverage our data capacity, especially like expanding the data coverage and make it more reliable with the quantitative and this cross-border data support, and to make them being well informed, and also we can also leverage in our platforms by some kind of investor educations. So like these kind of events, we are always collaborated with parties like Hong Kong MA and also Hong Kong Exchange. And here this time we collaborated with CBI. So we do this kind of broadcasting and live streaming of this kind of events. And so by offering more events like this, we can also draw market attention to absorb the insights from different leaders, that from like regulatory, financial market, and also industry sectors, to share the latest ideas and also the hot topics in the sustainable finance or transition finance. And what's more is that in spite of the data-wise, we also want to enhance our infrastructure, that like providing the trading platforms and also some asset management solutions, and also provide some kind of like product classifications. And here I want to just make addition to what Jack said, because there is not only demand for the ESG rating or some underlying data for the specific companies, there are also growing demand for the fund product, because a lot of like pension funds or the insurance, asset management, and also like banks, wealth management, they have a growing demand in incorporating the ESG or green transition sectors into their investment. So there is a growing demand in how to identify the performance of the fund product, and that's why coping with that, Wind has already launched our wind fund rating, and also the first domestic carbon footprint accounting database, as well as we also launched our wind fund investment classifications, which has been widely applied and also quoted by the domestic financial institutions. So there is a lot of opportunities and blue water that we can keep dive in, and also we are always committed to stay ahead of this curve and continuously improving our offerings so that we can position ourselves to better meet the evolving needs of the market.
Thank you, Victoria. So fund product, carbon footprint, and all this. So Diana.
I'll take a slightly different kind of view on this issue and this question, more kind of a bird's eye view of what is needed for this thing to speed up, because I have no doubts that we're going in the right direction. My only kind of concern is that we're going a little bit slower than necessary. And one thing that I think it's worth mentioning from a perspective of financial service is geared off for this. I think what we need is more incentives, because you know, as from a perspective of exchange, you know that actually helping issuers issuing green bonds in your exchange is happening by incentivizing them. And actually there's a lot more that can happen in this respect. And if you look at the percentage of green bonds versus vanilla bonds, why they're so low still, despite of everything, because obviously we need more incentives. And this goes across everything. We need to incentivize the real industry, we need to incentivize the public. I mean, it's not going to happen by just kind of screwing one part of the system, which is the the financial sector and expecting everything to happen. So I think this is a global transition. We need to really, this is equivalent to the Industrial Revolution. We need to now go into another evolution, which will require a lot of effort. So I will perhaps stop here in the interest of time, but I definitely think we need to think more about how we can help each other and how we can incentivize. And if you look at the United States, for example, which do not have taxonomies, which do not have the sophisticated policy instruments, but they just came up with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is full with incentives for green investments. So we need more of this.
Absolutely. Go faster, incentive, cross-sector. Sure, I promise, max 5 minutes. Before I turn back to Shen 总，一会儿我先问 Jack 一下哈。Jack, your view on that? Yeah.
再给我们5分钟。
Okay.
5 minutes.
So, yes, we are personally very excited about the prospects for this trend towards transition, the overall trend towards sustainability. We think it's an irreversible trend, and it will only accelerate. And in fact, Europe is obviously the leader in this respect because there's just a very well-developed ecosystem, and there's a lot of shared cultural and common values around this. I predict that we in Asia will surpass North America because we think we're very much science-based, we're very quantitative-based. So when we talk to clients and we show them this is the benefit you get if you adopt this, they get it immediately. They're very pragmatic. Whereas I think in North America, there's still topics of ESG gets wrapped up in a lot of political and social debate. And so we're personally very, very excited about the prospects. We want to play a role in this transition. We want to provide the tools that can accelerate this transition. But by gathering and maintaining the best available data and analytics will make the entire market more transparent, and it will drive the capital to where it needs to go. So, for example, the only two Article 9, so the EU Article 9 designation funds, this is by far the most stringent standards. The only two EU Article 9 funds focused on China both use MioTech data, because we're the only firm that can provide that level of granularity to be able to sustain that designation. So we hope to facilitate, we are very much hopeful that capital flows remain free across borders, because we want to encourage foreign capital to invest in Hong Kong, to invest in China. Capital should be freely flowing. And in order for capital to flow, we need to have tools that are recognized by both Chinese firms as well as foreign firms. And so we hope to play that bridge by providing that common platform and the common methodology that can be used by all investors around the world.
Sure. So use data to drive capital flow, enhance transparency. Thank you, Jack. So 沈总，最后一个问题就是说未来的展望，然后呢，给我们这个在座的这个听众的一些想法和意见哈。然后对于投资者买不买单，怎么做？
对。就是我个人认为，未来的转型金融这个条件对金融机构，包括对企业和我们三方机构，都是一个很广阔的一个市场的这样一个空间，未来前景一定是有的。在这个过程中呢，投资人，我觉得我们说做转型金融这个，就是说为应对气候变化做这个工作的话，应该有4方的力量去做。第一个就是政府，政府的话，我觉得它应该是给政策、出标准、提要求。很简单，这3个如果政府不管是哪一个层面的，是吧？在大陆可能是通过全中国的一个监管部门，比如资本市场，我们去发转型债券；那么在金融机构条件，要求金融机构去配置绿色的资产，去配置转型的资产，是吧？就贷款也好，那么这样提出要求，给出标准之后，我觉得它就一定能够落下去。就是说，转型金融它还是有一个在最开始的时候，应该是一个外部推动。最终导致内生的一个需求，应该是这样一个过程。然后第二个参与的重要的主体就是提到的这个金融机构投资人。对于投资人来说呢，因为大部分投资人，我觉得他的第一个，因为我们中诚信是做信用评级的，那么第一个它是防风险，那也有要高收益的，在这两者再去平衡，那看我们这个投资机构怎么样去 去判断我们的资产，说我们的喜好是什么。如果从可持续发展的角度来说，转型这个条线应该是未来可持续发展一个重要的方向。在这个过程中呢，应该还要合理的去控制我们的从自身的发展，包括监管对我们要求的风险的防范。那么第三个主体就是我们这样的一个第三方的机构。第三方机构呢，在整个就在中国大陆来说，我觉得我们第三方机构起到了一个特别重要的作用，它是一个市场的一个宣讲的这样一个身份的作用。因为我们到时候都要去跑业务，那我要告诉你什么是绿色的，什么是转型的，什么是可持续的，是吧？那这个过程中，我们三方机构呢，它是非常重要的。但这个过程中呢，我觉得三方机构一定要秉持一个公正公利的一个身份，就是一定是要专业的，要公正的，然后才能为投资人提供一个很好的一个服务。像我们中证信在国内的绿色债券、可持债券这方面，我们已经做了500多家的这样的机构哈。当然，在香港我们要下一步为香港尽职尽责去贡献我们的力量。然后第四个，我觉得最重要的，其实最核心的就是我们在 ESG 这个条件中 C 位的这个是什么？其实就是主体是企业。我们所有的这些政府也好、金融机构也好，我们三方机构都是为它服务的。所以这个从前景来说，我觉得是非常好的。但是要实现这样一个目标，为人类发展这样一个宏观目标来说，我们都要一起去努力。对。
谢谢沈总。Four forces: government, FI, third party, ESG. So, Sean, I promise 5 minutes 30 seconds. So, thank you for all the panelists. I hope today is a teaser and work together. Thank you. 谢谢。不会。